Okay, I will begin. So good afternoon and welcome to the second online Cambridge Ukrainian Studies conversation. My name is Olenka Pevny, and I am the University Lecturer in Slavonic Studies at the Faculty of Modern and Medieval Languages and Linguistics and the Director of the Ukrainian Studies program. So normally, we would invite you to join us in Cambridge for a scheduled event or lecture, but the coronavirus has forced us to seek different venues of contact with those who share our interests and who, like us, desire to partake in dialogue and discussion. So while we miss the energy of physical presence, the use of social media has the benefit of diversifying and expanding our audience and of promoting new interactions. So we extend a genuinely warm welcome to all of those who are joining us who are already acquainted with our program, as well as to those who are joining us for the first time. Today, our topic is education in Ukraine, with a special emphasis on educational reform and the impact of COVID-19 on Ukraine's educational system. We are extremely honored to welcome Dr. Serhiy Kvit to lead us in this conversation. Dr. Kvit is chairman of Ukraine's National Agency for Quality Assurance in Higher Education, and formerly he served as Minister of Education and Science of Ukraine and as president of the Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, Ukraine's leading institution of higher learning. Dr. Kvit is also a literary critic and a journalist. In all of these capacities, he has promoted open debate, transparency, and reform in media, in education, and in government. So Dr. Kvit will be joined today by Andrii Smytsniuk, who is the Ukrainian language teaching officer at the University of Cambridge, and they will take part in a 30-minute conversation that will be followed by a question and answer period. So we ask our audience to submit questions in written form via the Q&A and or chat feature on Zoom. I will be collecting these questions and presenting them to Dr. Kvit at the end of the 30-minute conversation. So without further ado, and with great thanks to our guest speaker, Dr. Kvit, I give the floor to our speakers and then awaiting the questions from our audience. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Olenka, and I'm really honored to have the opportunity to speak to you about current Ukrainian education system, and especially in time of coronavirus pandemic. But you know that the topic of my talk, Ukrainian education in lockdown, you know, frankly speaking, I'm considering it more from a metaphorical maybe point of view than in the connection with a coronavirus pandemic. Because of current Ukrainian political and economic context, we could face a decline in the attention of the political forces in power to the most important educational projects, among which I would name three: decentralization, university autonomy, and so-called new Ukrainian school. In my opinion, challenges such as the coronavirus pandemic already reinforce Ukrainian education in itself. Our real problems are more about politics than about the sustainability of the educational system. Therefore, my short-term predictions are quite pessimistic, I think. It means in the context of the pandemic, we are anticipating the cessation of many key educational projects. First, the decentralization one. The coronavirus acts as a catalyst for such processes. Therefore, during the recent Ukrainian budget cuts, the decentralization project suffered the most. And I think that's really bad. And decentralization is one of the most important achievements of the revolution of dignity, which means first financial autonomy of local governments, the ability to make independent decisions on many important issues, primarily related to the development of local infrastructure, construction of roads, schools, kindergartens, hospitals, and so on. Local government budgets have increased more than 50% in comparison to 2014, when our government started to work. The decentralization project is extremely important for the strengthening the project of university autonomy from an ideological maybe point of view, because university autonomy ideologically, psychologically, if you want, is decentralization. It's very important for our public mind of Ukraine as a post-Soviet country, and for the further development of the new Ukrainian school from an infrastructural point of view, and for understanding the importance of education in general, both for communities and for the whole society. That is why I think that decentralization project is under the threat, and we should, Ukrainian civil society should pay special attention and protect this project. You know that I have found some statistics for you that are adequate but not always accurate, as the situation in the Ukrainian educational sphere has been steadily worsening over the past year, and especially during the current global quarantine. Today in Ukraine, we are talking about keeping the state policy in the direction that was set after the 2014 Revolution of Dignity. Ukraine has a total population a little less than 42 million people. Ukraine ranks 61st in the world in the level of GDP, 40th place on scientific potential, 41st place on the potential of the higher education system. Education expenses, it's about $6 billion US, more than 6% of GDP in 2019, and 5.7% of GDP this year. As you can see, the percentage of GDP is quite high, comparable, for instance, even with Germany. However, Ukraine has a small GDP. This is the problem. Permanent cause of the economic crisis, Russian invasion and undeclared war. We have about 2 million IDPs in Ukraine from occupied by Russia territories of Crimea and Donbass. 17 universities and 10 research institutes were evacuated from the occupied territories. And Ukraine lost about 20% of the national economy only in 2014 after Russian invasion. Which obstacles to educational reform do we have? First of all, I think it's a lack agents of changes. Post-Soviet way of thinking of Ukrainian politicians, especially regarding to financial autonomy of educational institutions. Then it's conservatism of educational managers. You know that in Ukraine, as a post-Soviet country, practice is important. At first, not legislation, but practice, how we use these laws. Outdated network of educational institutions, outdated content of study programs, lack of autonomy and responsibility, a lack of communication with the labor market, and of course, fundamental lack of funds. Our priorities is universal access to quality education, the decentralization of governance, the autonomy of educational institutions, deregulations, reduction in bureaucracy, public-private partnership, and state-community management, and internationalization. Of course, it's important.
If I could interrupt you. So, because you are the head of the agency that does the higher education quality.
Right, right.
Yeah. So, how does it? What is your role in this whole process of decentralization? And
what is our role? you know, it's interesting question because you know, it's not just question of our agency, because it's related to the whole history of reformation of Ukrainian higher education. We started, it means I need to talk more than only about our institutions, because it's important. We started our project, University Autonomy, just after the Orange Revolution in 2005. We organized the consortium on university autonomy, which included 8 universities from different parts of Ukraine, both private and public. It included, you know, Kyiv-Mohyla Academy and the small private university in Kyiv of economy and law, Krok. Step, it means step. In Lviv, we had Ukrainian Catholic University and Lviv National Taras Franko University, and national universities from Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, and Chernivtsi. And we developed the concept of university autonomy. And by the way, your university played an important role in this process, because in that time we tried to understand what does it mean, university autonomy, and we formulated the concept of comprehensive university autonomy, which included academic, financial, and organizational autonomy. In time of Yanukovych regime, our activity developed, you know, in creation of so-called working group, which started to work on the draft law on higher education. We have prepared this draft law, and after the Revolution of Dignity, it was approved by the parliament. It was 2014. According to this draft law, you know, it was based on the idea of comprehensive university autonomy, and it was very important part of our new system of higher education. This agency, it's called National Agency for Higher Education Quality Assurance. You know, our responsibility is the major strategic goals of our agency is to develop the culture of quality assurance in higher education, to assure the quality of the education services and you know, research, to meet the international standards. We collaborate with European Association for Quality Assurance in Higher Education, so-called ENQA, with British the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education, QA, with Advanced HE, also is British British organization, which created so-called teaching excellence framework, and they pay a special attention to the quality of teaching and learning, not only to quality of research, as the most, you know, well-known international rankings like QS or something. And it means that we are creating requirements to our universities, to our study programs at our universities. We're responsible for institutional accreditation, for accreditation of independent institutions, which also will be responsible for accreditation, for creating national rankings, and so on. It means we are responsible for requirements. We are, you know, we are making important questions about quality of education. And, you know, it's also important that, you know, people, I mean, universities, academic community trust us. It's really, really important. It means on one hand, we have our university universities already have academic autonomy. The problem is that they still don't have financial autonomy. It means they can't capitalize their achievements, their academic achievements. It means the next step, what we should do near time, we need to establish financial autonomy of our universities. And on one hand, our universities will have full financial and academic autonomy. On the other hand, our organization is, important for the, for requirements. And also, we are considering ourselves as a partners of universities. It means we are not controller. We try to help them. We have very close communication with all the best Ukrainian universities. But if to be honest, we have a lot of higher education institutions with a very low level of quality. And that is why we have a lot of tasks. But I believe that we are playing, and we still will play a very important role for the further development of the quality of Ukrainian higher education.
May I just interrupt and ask one question?
Yeah.
When you talk about these, this quality assurance, how do you, is there some type of check system that what is your ability to check that these universities and institutions with which you are communicating are actually fulfilling these new requirements? And is there assistance on the ground level to help universities implement these requirements? So it's one thing to say, we want to stop plagiarism, but then you have to create a whole culture from the ground up, I would think, in terms of plagiarism and bribery and all of these chronic problems in the Ukrainian educational system. So I'm just thinking that you can always ask someone to do this and try to talk about these changes, but you need to offer these universities help to do this. For example, the salaries of lecturers or professors, do you have some say in whether these salaries will increase to such a degree that these educators will not need to take bribes in order to make a living?
Olenka, you're absolutely right. I think that our maybe the most important task to develop the internal culture of our universities. This internal culture must include the culture of academic integrity. All universities must have own requirements to themselves about quality and so on. And everything starts from internal culture. And that is why we try to push them to develop this culture. And the question of bribes and corruption, it's it's social problem. It's not we can't fix this problem only on the level of universities. Okay, it's social problem. But at the same time, we need we try to deliver to our higher education institutions the idea that their reputation at first. Reputation is the most important capital. Everything starts with a reputation, and they must build their reputation. If we are talking about bribes, for instance, it's interesting that we can talk a lot about bribes among our teachers or rectors or so on, but you know that we have a very reliable sociological institution, Democratic Initiatives Foundation, and Irina Bekeshkina, who was director of that organization for years. Unfortunately, she died this year. She organized special research about corruption within universities, and she told me that the problem is that our students potentially much more open to corruption than teachers. They are ready to pay bribes much more in comparison to teachers who who are not ready to get these bribes. You know, like students are ready to give these bribes. We can find different explanations for this fact, but you know, it's not it's not our task as a separate problem. We are considering this problem within the complex approach to the development of our institutions. And I think we need to cut the number of our higher education institutions and to increase their quality. And if our universities have full financial autonomy, I do believe that in this case, they will not need bribes, because they will start to build their reputation, and they could capitalize their academic achievements. You know, we should create another situations in Ukrainian higher education area, and I think we do this step by step. But I agree with you that this is a huge problem. And another case, it's related to academic integrity. The biggest problem in Ukraine is you know, I've read that in Great Britain maybe it's ghostwriting, but in Ukraine it's not ghostwriting. It's increasing this problem, ghostwriting. But in Ukraine, mostly we are talking about you know.
And academic dishonesty and
academic dishonest. Okay, yeah, and our people from the 1990s very often try to you know, what is this term?
To cheat, to write off.
Maybe to plagiarize, or
plagiarism, right? Thank you very much. It's about plagiarism, and you know that we elaborated a special procedure for the annulment of decisions of specialized academic council to confer a research degree, and it's the most important document for our agency, and it should be approved by the government near time. But maybe this month or next month, it depends on you know, depends on our quarantine. We will have the next meeting of our agency, and we will consider, I believe, 6 very well-known cases in plagiarism, and everyone in Ukraine knows all these names, because it's names. It's about names of our politicians, of people, you know, who try to be well known, you know, in different spheres, but they plagiarized a lot, and we will consider all these cases, and we'll make final decisions about them. And I think it will be a good example for other people, because it's our responsibility by law, and I think our agency will play a special role, I think.
So are you saying that you have the power to revoke these degrees?
Actually, we have the power according to law, but in fact, we will such power when our this document, this procedure, will be approved by the government. I believe it will happen near time. But what we decided to do, we decided to start to consider such cases because we are responsible by law, you know. And I think it will be important for, you know, I think we will create public cases, you know, and media discussion, and because this is important, that everyone should understand that they should stop to do like this, you know, stop plagiarize. And but I think we also need to develop our legislation, especially with ghostwriting, because we know a lot of cases when Ukrainian PhD students prepare you know, some articles, so-called scientific articles for people even in Great Britain or in some countries with very good universities and very good traditions. It's a global problem, okay? But that is why we need to change our legislation. And by the way, I think according ghostwriting, maybe Great Britain is the most advanced, you know, they elaborated the most advanced tradition how they can fight it according to legislation. Yeah.
And does so current lockdown, this coronavirus pandemic, disrupt the work of accreditation of universities and reform in general?
Really interesting question, because you know, we know that we were first in the world that we started to do some processes, because it's a very complex you know, procedure of accreditation, and we started to you know, we started some processes, especially expertise. It's the first stage of accreditation online, you know, and first of all, you know, from the beginning, we had some doubts how you know, it will develop in the future, but now we you know, we know that it's a right way, and our work is very successful because both sides, our agency and our universities, take it very seriously. They have, both sides have good preparation, you know, and it works. And it's interesting that it's because it works using Zoom, we can record it, you know. That is why we have full documentation how it worked. That is why I think that I can see that we didn't stop accreditation processes. In comparison to Great Britain, you have a different situation, because the time of accreditation of some university is 1 year, you know. But in Ukraine, it's just, we have a deal on our stage. It's only first year of our activity. We have a deal only with accreditation of study programs, not institutional accreditation yet. I believe we started to do this from the next academic year. But in Great Britain, you have 1 academic year, we have only 2 months for accreditation of 1 study program. That is why it's so complicated to us. But I think that it works, you know, and we didn't stop our activity.
And you said in one of your interviews that you will focus more on the process of teaching rather than the result of education. So could you explain that?
You know, process approach, you know, it's a policy of all countries which have good universities, like Great Britain, United States, Canada, Australia, and so on. Previously, the most important question was, what is your result? But if result is bad, we can't do something, because it's result, you know. It's result. If result was very good, you know, it's good. It means the most important question is the process. How some universities are organizing the study process, educational process, and what kind of attitude they have to their students. How they create their study program themselves. What kind of policy do they have according to academic integrity, and so on. We have 10 criteria, 9 plus 1. Plus 1 because this one belongs to the PhD level, you know, and it's very clear. We have a lot of explanations. We are creating a lot of different documents, which are important for our academic community to change their mind, because previously it worked in a completely another way, a different way. And I think the question is that Ukrainian academic community trust us. This trust is, I think, maybe in our case, it's the most important decisions of our agency.
And there are, I'm not sure about the exact number, but there are almost, from what I know, 600 universities, even more in Ukraine. While in the UK, for example,
no,
there are...
I'm not sure, because okay. It's, I think nobody have right answer to your question, how many higher education institutions we have. Why? Because formally we have about 288 universities, maybe, okay?
Okay.
But the problem is that we have huge number of their branches. Very often these branches don't have enough level of quality. But in fact, these branches are separate higher education institutions. All of them have their own policy, their own, teachers, their students, some level of quality of their study programs and so on. That is why the most important problem is, or question with level of education, with quality of education related to these branches. Also, we can't understand until now how we look at our colleges, because formally we have colleges, like in maybe Great Britain, like in the United States or Canada or Germany, but in fact it's just renamed Soviet or post-Soviet technicums, and it's another task of reformation of our educational area, that we need to create polyfunctional big institutions, because if we compare, for instance, one Ukrainian college to, for instance, a American community college, our college, the size of our college is just less than one department of American community college. American community college understands who are their stakeholders, because if economy is in crisis, the most number of graduates are going to universities. Okay, if there is no crisis, the most number of graduates are going to labor market. And of course, it's community college. It means that it's a kind of education during the life. But in Ukraine, the network of colleges, like, by the way, network of high schools, network of universities, was created in Stalin's time according to the network of our industry. But network of industry was changed dramatically in comparison to network of colleges, which is almost the same. It's not normal, but we are working on that. We have different good projects, and we currently we understand what we should do. That is why, why I started to talk about colleges, because we can consider our colleges as a part of a higher education system, but we need to change them, to develop them. And in this case, it could be part, but today, in fact, it's not part, but formally, it's kind of, gray zone. We can't understand deeply they are part of higher education system or not. That is why I think it's also a task of our agency to have, adequate requirements on quality to all these higher education institutions or their branches. Or one more, by the way, one more problem in Ukraine, or one more issue for Ukraine, that we have a lot of private universities, and I think it's very good. But the problem is that private universities until now are not compatible to state universities, you know, because they are very small. They don't have, you know, any research within their design. And you know, most of them were created in 1990s, and it's not about universities, you know. But in the future, I think we need to have you know, private universities much more stronger, and in the future, I believe that private universities will have real competition with state universities. Please, Olenka.
I have a very question about all of these multiplication of these institutions of higher learning, and both private and the technicums that you mentioned. Are they accredited by the government? Are they financed by the government? And why did such a large number of them develop and continues to exist? How do they financially survive?
Oh, it's a good question. You know, it's not, you know, if you think that it's not, you know, there is no case to pay for continued existing of such institutions, you are not right. You know, we need to consider the whole problems within our society, you know, and we should consider our educational system from the social point of view. When I was a student, I finished university in 1991. By the way, I couldn't become a student 4 times because I was not a member of the Communist Party. That is why I couldn't become a student of philosophy faculty. It was interesting, you know, story. But when I became a student, I remember that our teachers told us that we had at that time almost the same situation with the number of applicants. I mean, about 20% of grads from high schools came to universities on the West and in the Soviet Union. Currently, the Western Europe says that maybe 30% of grads from high schools come to the university. But in Ukraine, about 80% come to universities, you know. Why? Because they can't find a good job with, you know, with a good salary. And that is why they with their families, think like this, that maybe it will be better for us to spend some years at universities and get some diploma, you know. Maybe it will be better for the development of our career, because there is no good job on the you know, labor market. That is why it's also our educational system, in fact, today is kind of social project. That is why we need to continue, you know, finance some institutions before we develop them, before we change them according to some project of reformation.
And I think we're almost running out of time, or we ran out of time, but I would like to ask you if you could speak more about, so how did coronavirus actually impact the current reform, specifically maybe the new Ukrainian school, and was it not, I think it was the right decision to take out the money out of the Ministry of Education for dealing with coronavirus?
You know, I think, as I mentioned, that I don't think that coronavirus itself is a really big problem for our educational system and our reforms. The problem, I think we have more dangerous political problems. What kind of attitude of our government, you know, will we have near time, for instance? because unfortunately, our government looks, not very professional, if to be honest, and that we are not happy of their decisions, their different steps. Fortunately, we are still keeping our projects, our reforms in that direction which we started, after our revolutions. Ukrainians don't have any problems with revolutions. The problem only is with results of that revolutions. We can organize some consulting, deliver some consulting, how somebody can organize some revolution. But the problem is with the result, and it means political problems, much more dangerous in comparison to coronavirus, pandemic. I believe that it's only strengthening of our educational system, but it's not so easy. Today, for instance, I had a conversation, phone conversation with rector of Transcarpathian Academy of Arts. They have really big problems because they are preparing painters. They couldn't do this like this through Zoom, because they need to use their studios, and it's very practical and so on, because it's art. It's about art. But mostly, I think coronavirus is not so dangerous and harmful for our education system.
Okay, I think
it's just new experience, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I will interrupt and start asking some questions that I've received, if that's okay. Dr. Kvit.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay, so our first question comes from Katerina Yushchenko, and she asks, why haven't any major foreign universities established campuses or serious joint degree programs with Ukrainian universities? What are the barriers to these partnerships?
Mm-hmm. I think that we have a lot of joint programs between our universities and Western universities, not only Western universities. Only small Kyiv-Mohyla Academy have some, common MA programs with German universities, with Polish universities, with American universities, and we are quite small, I mean, in size. Some other universities have common programs with French universities and one more time Canadian or American. I think we have a lot of joint programs, and we don't have any problems with that. But it really is that we don't have such projects like establishing of campuses of some Western universities. I know some attempts to do this, but we still don't have. Maybe because of economical circumstances, and maybe our Western partners would like to establish such campuses for raising money.
I know. Dr. Kvit, can you hear us?
Their children, for instance, Great Britain, France, or Germany, or United States, then can do it, and they will save money in Ukraine. Even if formally it will be American university. We had some unsuccessful projects to establish some Western universities, but I believe that in the future we will have such campuses, and that it's a long conversation about that. But we have joint programs, master's programs, even PhD programs, and I think on our stage it's enough, because we need today to increase the quality of our education.
Before I ask a second question, I'm going to ask a question that pains me. So we have quite a number of applicants applying to the University of Cambridge from Ukraine, and they are successful in getting admission. So they're really quite good candidates. Unfortunately, they don't get funding. And I keep getting questions from such students in various fields, in Ukrainian studies, in chemistry, about funding possibilities for students to do, I'm sorry, that's my dog Bublik barking.
Yeah.
But for these students to come.
He tried to be participant of our conversation. Yes. You know, you know that Ukraine, I believe maybe 10 years ago, I don't remember, Ukraine established such project to finance our good students for obtaining different degrees at some Western universities. And I think in the future we must do this. What we do today, we only have some special program for Ukrainians who live, you know, around the world, who would like to come to Ukraine to study at Ukrainian universities. And mostly, it's interesting, it's people from Prидnestrovia, because in fact it's Ukrainian ethnical territory, a lot of Ukrainian villages, you know, even Ukrainian speaking people with Ukrainian schools, and mostly people from Pridnestrovia come to Ukraine. But unfortunately today it's impossible to do this, but in the future we will do this, because we understand the importance of that. And we you know, the China may be a very good example for Ukraine in this case. And Ukraine, as I mentioned, already started to do this. And I believe maybe for 3 or 4 years such project worked, and our government pay some, you know, fellowship for our students. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a question from Alan Flowers. What plans are there to provide a strong system of external auditors, external examiners for Ukrainian universities who would sample student work, as in the UK, and monitor the assessment procedures? Would that not help reduce corruption and improve academic integrity? Where could such external examiners be sourced from to ensure the audit process was not also corrupt?
Yeah, if I understood correctly, it's about kind of peer review system, right? Peer review, independent specialists who can understand and who can prepare some review about policy, for instance, right? It's well, about independent.
In the UK, what we have is we have this very intensive process, or at Cambridge.
Yeah, I see. You know that I think it's a very important part of our activity, and we try to implement such practice through our own example. For instance, I mentioned to you this procedure for the annulment of decisions of specialized academic council to confer a research degree. It's about fighting plagiarism. And we have a very deep review of one American professor who specialized in this case, you know, and we publish it in the English language on our website. We translate it in Ukrainian language, and the next step, our French maybe colleagues will be the first who will prepare a special peer review of our policy. And we try to encourage our universities to establish such practice, because, you know, everything it depends on the internal culture, one more time, of universities, of higher education institutions, how they will develop themselves. And such practice is so important, and we try promote such practice. We call it a peer review system. Peer review, it's independent reviewers who can come to Ukraine and prepare some independent view on activity of some study program or even university. And maybe because we currently we are preparing special procedure, formal procedure for accreditation of universities, and we think that we will implement this idea into this procedure. That is why I think it's very important part of activity of both our agency and all our higher education institutions. Thank you for that idea, but we think about this.
Okay, we have another question from Oksana Chabanyuk, and Oksana asks, will your agency recommend the universities in Ukraine to unite into bigger institutions? And how soon may this happen?
I think it will be very soon. Why? Because in the end of last year, we changed we changed the practice of financing of our state institutions or our public. We are changing the practice of public financing of our institutions. It will be the state in the future from this year will deliver finances through special formula, and this formula reflects the achievements of some universities in different fields. And it's, I consider this new practice as a further step for the establishing of full financial autonomy of our universities. And I mean that financial tools are the most effective for reaching of such goal. I mean, we need really to make our universities bigger. But at the same time, the size of university, it's not, something which is important for, for their quality. I have just two examples in Ukraine, Kyiv-Mohyla Academy and Ukrainian Catholic University. Both of them are not so big, but they have quite good level of quality, but I think we are using financial tools, and more or less, I believe that near 2 years we will become witnesses of changing of size of some our universities, even that universities which are really big in comparison to Ukrainian environment. Like Kyiv Polytechnica or Kharkiv, National Karazin University, and so on. I think near time our university will become bigger. Mm-hmm.
Okay, are you ready for another question? This
Yes.
question is not on the topic that you want to speak about, but here it goes. It's on lockdown. So Oleksiy Rudenko asks, the lockdown has clearly demonstrated that Ukrainian universities and some of the professors, even at top universities, aren't ready to face the challenges of online learning that appeared after closure of the universities. How could this be addressed by the ministry or agency if a particular university continues to claim that their approach of distance learning is adequate?
It's a challenge, of course, but of course, we have some, different examples, but mostly I think that we are, as a system, we are overcoming these obstacles, and this example, this challenge is quite fruitful for our system, not only for teachers or students, but we have a lot of jokes about parents who communicate with teachers in high schools, and it's a lot of jokes, but it is so rapidly changing of the whole system. Of course, some professors, especially some older people, some professors who spent their whole life at the university, have maybe some problems, but mostly it works. And of course, there is a big difference between different institutions. It works in good institutions, but there are some number of higher education institutions which don't have don't pay enough attention to such tasks to organize online education. But I think more or less it's fruitful, and it makes us stronger, I think.
So I am just going to check. I think I finished all of the questions in the question and answer section, so I will just check in the chat. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I will pose the last question. So since we are a Ukrainian studies program and we are very much interested in assisting change and reform in Ukraine, do you have any suggestions of how we could participate?
I would like to tell you a very short story about the influence of Cambridge University at our reformation process in Ukraine. I believe it was in 2006. We had I started to tell you about this earlier, that we had a very interesting small project, and we came, our delegation of our consortium on university autonomy came to Great Britain, to Cambridge, and we tried to understand how it works, what is really the essence of university autonomy, how it works in Cambridge. All these traditions, it was so interesting, so impressive to us. And we had one seminar, and I remember that vice rector of Cambridge told us, if you would like to establish such an important project, you need for that three things: traditions, right people, and trust. And we had one representative of presidential administration at that time who came with us, who accompanied our delegation to Cambridge. And I turned to him and asked him, did you hear they are speaking about trust? There is no such notion in Ukrainian legislation. What is trust? It's not important. It was so it was really important for understanding of psychology of our people, of our state officials in that time. That is why we need to implement, to understand the importance of such things like trust. No trust, no university, because no internal culture, and that's all. That is why I think sometimes we need we need close communication with such institution like yours. Maybe sometimes we need some pieces of advice. Maybe we have different special situations in Ukraine, and I think we need communication, more communication with you. And maybe in the future, after our today meeting, we will continue our collaboration, and I would like to thank you so much. It was really interesting for me, and maybe I had the opportunity to deliver some more information about current Ukraine, which is not so easy, of course, but we are living in the world which is rapidly changing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I certainly have learned a lot, and I hope those in our audience have learned a lot. So I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. I hope we do continue this conversation. I'd like to thank Andrii Smytsniuk for preparing and organizing this conversation. And I don't know, Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Heroyam Slava. Thank you, Andrii. Thank you, Olenka. And thank you very much to all people who join us and who took part in our meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful...
Thank you, Dr. Kvit. It was a pleasure having you. And me personally, I learned also a lot.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Bye-bye.